And I'll introduce Blair to introduce our speaker.
All right, so tonight I have the honor to introduce our speaker, Dr. Terry Ryan Kane. A little bit more about her. Dr. Kane entered veterinary school at UI with a master's degree in ecology. She took beekeeping from the UI Extension Service during vet school as part of an animal behavior project. As a pilot, she was interested in their navigation and communication behavior, the Waggle dance. After graduation, she owned and operated Michigan's first feline-only practice for 23 years. The rigors of owning a practice and raising a family interrupted any beekeeping at that time, so she was an AVMA, AAAS, Congressional Science and Technology Policy Fellow in 2010 and 2011 in Senator Gillibrand's Senate office. Her portfolio included the Farm Bill, antibiotic resistance, emerging diseases, and food safety and security. Returning home to Ann Arbor, Michigan, she started up beekeeping again. And with knowledge of how critical pollinators are to food security and what the new FDA guidelines meant to beekeepers, she started A2B Vet, a veterinary practice serving our honeybee keepers and other pollinators. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Kane. Thank you much.
Hello, welcome. It's really nice to have such a friendly crowd. Thank you. Well, I'll get right to it. This is probably the poster child for One Health right now. And as we go through this, you'll see. I'm here tonight mainly to talk to you about honeybees, our #1 managed pollinator, but as you're probably aware of, all pollinators are in trouble. We have 4,000 species of native bees in the United States, 46 species of bumblebees, and thousands of species of ants, wasps, bees, beetles, flies, butterflies, bats, and birds. All of our pollinators are in trouble, not just honeybees. So we'll be talking about all of them. First, I'm going to talk about just a brief history of the bees. They co-evolved with angiosperms, our flowering plants, for millions of years. And they've co-evolved to such an extent that they're actually interdependent. There are some flowers that are built for bees, and there's bees that are built for flowers. And some bees are specialists, and some bees, that is, they have flower fidelity. They'll go to one type of flower. And then there's many bees that are generalists. Our feral bees, our native bees, a lot of them live in holes in the logs or trees or under leaf litter. Stand closer.
No, you're fine.
Okay.
I'm just going to modify this. What's the play? Sorry.
It's all right. Anyway, bees are found everywhere that there are flowers. So the only continent that excludes is Antarctica. Let's go back a minute. Beekeeping has been practiced for millennia. We have cave paintings from Spain and Africa from as far back as 1500 BC. The Egyptians were the first actually commercial beekeepers, which probably explains why their agriculture was so successful. We have writings from Aristotle and Hippocrates describing apiary activity, and in fact Hippocrates, father of medicine, has wrote detailed notes about the healing powers of honey and propolis. And in the New World, the Mayans were the first people that we know of that had organized beekeeping. By the 1600s, commercial beekeeping was a global entity. There were commercial laws and taxes and levies. You could pay your taxes with honey and mead, which is honey beer. Scientific articles were being published and new methodologies in beekeeping started. Well, experienced beekeepers, the Jesuit missionaries and the colonists, brought the European honeybee, Apis mellifera, to North America. And by the 1800s, Beekeeping had gone as far west as California. By the 1920s, it was as far north as Alaska. The Native Americans called it white men's flies. What happened? I'm telling you this little history because in the 21st century, we have seen bee losses like never before. In the last half decade, we've lost a third of our national bee herd, 1 million colonies a year. We have half the bee colonies that we had after World War II. And we're losing our wild bees, our wild pollinators. We've had the first bumblebee listed as endangered, the rusty patched bumblebee. And this is a global pollen. This is not confined to the United States. This is global. So this is a global food security issue. This is a One Health issue. If we want pollinators into the 22nd century, we do need to understand what's going on and how to mitigate these losses. Well, we need flower feeders. Flowers are the reproductive organs of plants. And pollination is essential for ecosystem security. If we want fruits and nuts and a variety of vegetables, this is just a partial list. It's not a full list. I just made how much could fit on the slide. Farmers rely on pollinators for 100 crops. This is a $20 billion industry. Some of these maybe you don't even like, but coffee, bee pollinated. Cotton, bee pollinated. There are some of these things that provide nutrition to people. A lot of these crops are not just pollinated by honeybees. There are other pollinators that can and do pollinate these. There's USD research ongoing on what we call second string pollinators, bumblebees, mason bees, digger bees, and such. And it's called the Integrated Crop Pollination Program. So any of you in agriculture want to support that. But it's still the honeybee that is our primary pollinator. In my home state of Michigan, which is apples, cherries, and blueberries primarily, much like New York and Maine, this is a $1 billion industry to us. And we don't have enough bees anymore in our state, like many states, to pollinate our fruit trees. So we pay to bring in bees to pollinate our crops. It's not just pollination services. Honey production and the products from a hive add a lot of income to a lot of beekeepers. Americans consume way more honey than what our bees can support. And we do import honey from other countries. And the products from a hive, beeswax, pollen, and propolis, these different colors of honey that you see just depend on the nectar source. Wax, all these compounds are made, and who hasn't heard of Burt's Bees since Clorox bought the company? Well, let me introduce you to the cast of characters. A hive is considered a superorganism, even though it consists of 10,000 to 60,000 to 80,000 individual bees. The colony acts as a unit with a clear defined division of labor. This is a little worker bee. She's a sterile female, and she has a variety of jobs, one of which is thermal regulation of the hive, keeping it cool in the summer and warm in the winter, which is about 90 to 98 degrees year-round. She has a stinger. A little larger bee is the male drone. His only job, his one and only job, is mating with the queen. And when he mates, he dies. About 5% of the colony population are drones. And at this time of year, heading into winter, the hive's preparing for winter, the female workers kick the drones out of the hive and they die. He's the couch potato of the hive. And this is the queen, larger. She's the mother of the hive. So when the queen emerges as adult, after a few days when her wings dry, the virgin queen leaves the hive, and flies miles and miles away and mates with about a dozen or 2 dozen drones, different drones, high up in the air, 30, 40 feet, half a mile. And she does this dozens of times and returns to her hive and becomes so robust because she's storing up to 7 million sperm. And she lays up to 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day. Now, most commercial beekeepers will keep, her lifespan's 2 to 5 years, by the way, but most commercial beekeepers will replace their queens every 1 to 2 years to get maximum fertility. Or the hive may replace her if they detect that the queen is sick or not doing well or infertile. And she's surrounded by a retinue of worker bees, and the communication within the hive is done with pheromones. Each cast member has dozens of glands of pheromones, so there's chemical communication between the hive members. I want to talk a little bit about the nurse bee. The worker bee, the female that I talked about, who has the variety of jobs, she's the one that has what we call polymorphism of her phenotype. And she first emerges as a nurse bee, taking care of the larvae in these hexagonal cells that she has made, other worker bees have made. And then she'll graduate from this after a couple weeks to a housekeeping bee, where she builds comb, repairs home, is a mortuary bee, takes out dead bees, just takes care of the hive, meets the foragers at the hive, takes food, and such. So she's attending, building, redecorating, managing. And then she graduates to a guard bee or a forager bee. And she is so adapted for her jobs. So as she flies from flower to flower, the pollen sticks to her. And if you've ever had a kid who broke one of those beanbag chairs with the little styrofoam balls, that's what pollen is. Well, pollen is the male part of the plant. So as she collects this pollen on her body and flies to the next flower, some of it gets deposited on the female part of the plant. That's pollination. But what she does, all this pollen sticks to her hairs, and she has a tibial rake on her leg, and she rakes all the remaining pollen off and stores it in her pollen basket called the corbicula to take it back to the hive. This close-up shows you that she even has hairs on her eyes. Now, bees have compound eyes. They have about 4,000 to 6,000 separate eyes. Each one has a lens, an optic nerve. They can see polarized light and UV. Now, the drone that you saw earlier with the bigger eyes, he has more of these ommatidia because he has to find that little centimeter female at 40 feet up in the air. That's why he has the bigger eyes. So just some definitions. Most commercial bee, there's many, many types of hives in the world. But this is the most popular one for commercial keepers. And it's kind of like a filing cabinet because it has these frames that you can pull out and look at and inspect. And the worker bees build this comb. Here's her little wax gland. So these little tiny millimeter pieces of wax that this little female makes from all these hexagonal cells to store the larvae that you saw, to store the honey in. And this is pollen. Now, when the workers bring back the pollen to the hive, they mix it with some saliva and some microbes, and they make a fermented food, like silage we use for food animals. And it's the same thing. It's called bee bread, and that's fed to the larvae. Bees get a bad rep, so I want to clear this up. That's not a bee. That's a wasp. How do you know? Because it's not fuzzy. That's a yellow jacket. This is the one that everybody says, a bee stung me. This guy will sting over and over and over. That's a yellow jacket. This is fuzzy. It's a bumblebee. And that's a mimic. That's a bee fly. And the way you can tell, not only is it not fuzzy, but it's only got one pair of wings. Bees have 2 pairs of wings. Bees, only the female bee stings. The drone doesn't have a stinger. The queen has a stinger, but she stays in the hive, and you're not going to be running into her. These are the guys that are responsible for everybody being afraid of bees. Just wanted to make that clear. So I want to share just a little bit how I fell in love with bees and why I think they are one of the most fascinating animals on the planet. When I was in graduate school, I had read Carl von Frisch's book, which came out in '67, on the communication of bees, which he dubbed the Waggle dance. And oh, by the way, Carl von Frisch won the Nobel Prize in Medicine for this work that I'll be talking about. This is me in vet school. I took beekeeping from the University of Illinois Extension Service because in graduate school I was studying the phenotypic expression of genotype. That is, your hair color, animal's fur color, your eye color, whether an animal is striped or spotted. This is all an expression of your genes. So is behavior. The interesting part about insects is they're the perfect animal to study behavior because they have quantifiable innate behaviors that you can measure. Mammals are too confusing. But in the bee, which we'll talk about too, we now know that nutrition determines development in some of these bees. So this worker bee that goes from the polymorphism of these different jobs, this is nutrition based. And because of the coevolution of plants and bees over millennia, we now know that plants are actually producing uncoded bits of messenger RNA that the bees pick up in the nectar that affects the development of the bee. Did you know that? Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So the Waggle dance is how I got interested in bees. And as a pilot, I was fascinated with their ability to navigate. They can do latitude and longitude. When I was a baby pilot, I used train tracks, highways, roads. More than once I used a water tower to find out where I was. Bees have had GPS for millions of years. We didn't get it until the 90s. So I'm so fascinated with this, and so few people have seen this. I brought a movie to show you of Carl von Frisch's Waggle dance. So let me set this up. So the worker bee comes back to the hive. She climbs on all her sisters, and she vibrates. And that's a message. I've got something to tell you. And she starts this dance. This is the waggles. And now we know that 1 second of waggle equals 750 meters. And you'll see her rotate. The waggle tells her sisters how far away the flower is. The direction of her waggle tells her sisters where the flower is relative to the sun. When they exit the hive, they know where to fly. The circuits she does and the number of circuits she does communicates to the hive the value of that food resource in seconds. That's it. And then the rest of the bees take off and they go to that flower. I couldn't even fly that direct. There's no animal like this. So you've heard about turtles migrating, terns migrating, whales migrating. No other animal does this. This is phenomenal. In fact, poor Carl von Frisch and his graduate students didn't have computers. These are all computer analyzed now. So this is done by a biologist at Virginia Tech, Margaret Cuvion. She analyzed over 7,000 waggle dances on a computer. And she determined some logical things. One, in the spring when there's lots of flowers, the bees don't have to travel very far. And this time of year, when we go into what we call the dearth period, where there's less bloom, the bees routinely will fly up to 3 miles away. This is in meters, 6,000 meters. Routinely. And that's hard on them because we're heading into the winter. There's less blooms. They got to go this many miles. Bees have been seen at 6 miles, by the way, but routinely at 3. Well, Marla Spivak, oops, let me back up, at the University of Minnesota took this even further. Her bee research lab took pollen samples from the bees, identified the plant, computer analyzed the dance, followed it to that plant. That's how, that's their GPS. Yes?
If they're using, I understand using the sun as a reference point, but only if you can see it. They're doing
No. They use polarized light and UV. They have these ocelli.
Right, but they're inside the hive and they're doing this dance, right?
Yeah.
So you can't see the sun and say, okay, there's the sun, it's 30 degrees this way. Is it wherever the entrance or exit is?
It's from the entrance. They exit and they know what angle to go to from the direction of the waggle.
Okay, so wherever you fly out the entrance, head towards the sun, and then the direction that I'm dancing in, that's where it's at.
Yeah. And by computer analysis, we found that you can find the flower. That's so good.
What's the reference inside the hive?
Just her communication.
Yeah,
on the comb. On the comb.
Okay.
Her
up and down.
Up and down. Yeah. So Marla Spivak's lab, based on that research, was able to determine actually the value of that food resource and how many flowers it would take to support a colony. Well, just like any other herd animal, bees get sick from all kinds of things. These amazing animals, I think, deserve the best health care that beekeepers and now veterinarians can give them. I highlighted some of the biology because of millions of years of evolution. Bees have put up with a lot of things. These diseases, fungal diseases, are not new to bees. These are what we consider stress diseases. These are fungus that bees have a behavior, what we call hygienic behavior, that if they see this in the hive, they will remove those bees from the hive. Colony collapse disorder, we still don't know what happened. In 2005, 2006, people started describing the loss of their hives. And it's characterized by one day your hive is fine, the next day they're gone. You open up the hive, you look at the frames, and what's left is some juvenile bees with an unattended queen, lots of honey, lots of pollen, no disease, no fungus. They're gone. They disappeared. In 2007, 36 states in our country reported colony collapse disorder. Some lost 30% of their hives. Some people lost 90% of their hives. It was devastating. This happened in India. This happened in Brazil. This happened in Europe. This was not confined to the United States. Something was going on globally. We still don't have the answer, but I'm going to go through parts of what we do know about it. Tracheal mites have been around. Our bees in the United States seem to be handling tracheal mites. It's a microscopic mite that invades the breathing tubes of bees. We don't even test for it anymore. The bees seem to be handling okay. What I do want to emphasize tonight is this guy. This is the #1 bee enemy right now, the varroa mite. This is an invasive species from Asia that devastated Europe in the 70s. We got it in the 80s. It's a small mite that invades the brood, that is the larvae and the pupae. If you see it on adults, it means that your hive is seriously infested. It sucks the blood, the hemolymph we call it, and the fat from the bees. But worse, it carries what we now know to be over 28 viruses. We took a picture of one that we can recognize on site, which is called deformed wing virus. You can see here. So bees can't even fly. Like I said, varroa mites are the #1 killer of bees right now. This is a close-up of this varroa mite on the bee. You can see how big it is. And if a bee has 2 or 3 of these things, imagine We don't get varroa mites, but we get ticks. What if you had 2 or 3 ticks the size of dinner plates on you? And you had a virus like a flu. You felt horrible. And then you had no food in the refrigerator. And you had to walk 3 miles, 4 miles to go get food. How would you be? This is what is going on with bees right now. There are only 2 bacterial diseases in bees that we know of. American foul, let me mention the name, foul brood. It goes back actually to Aristotle, described a foul-smelling bee disease. The 1700s, they described a foul-smelling brood disease that we now know was American foul brood. Why they call it American versus bee, it just has to be where they worked on it. American foul brood is the most destructive bacterial disease of hives. It's a gram-positive spore former, and these spores can live for decades, 60, 70 years. Nothing kills them. Heat, cold, chemicals, antibiotics don't touch them, nothing. The vegetative state is susceptible to antibiotics. Both of these diseases kill the larvae inside, and they produce a gooey mess. That's why they're called brood diseases. This one is reportable in some countries. In some states in the United States, they require that the hives be euthanized and the boxes burned. That's not true in every state. We don't recommend that they be treated with antibiotics. However, there are plenty of commercial beekeepers that do use preventative antibiotics. We'll get to that. European foul brood is another gram-positive, but it's a non-spore former, so it's much more common. I've seen it in some of my clients' hives. It used to be confined to wet spring times, but we're seeing it later and later. I talked to a couple of people from the bee research lab today, and we don't really know what's happening, some variation in that. It's been considered a stress disease, and people have handled it by managing their hives, supplementing with nutrition, and then using antibiotics. So that's how veterinarians got involved in beekeeping. With the new Veterinary Feed Directive and the FDA GFI 209, which says that veterinarians now have oversight of antibiotics used in all food animals, pigs, rabbits, fish, poultry. I don't think beekeepers thought this would include them, but honeybees are livestock. Their products are consumed by people, and now this is within our purview, and it's up to veterinarians to educate themselves about bee biology and bee diseases, and to help with the judicious use of antibiotics in bee products. The only legal antibiotics in bees are oxytetracycline, lincomycin, and tylosin. Those are the only 3. Medically important antibiotics that is used in people are no longer legal to use in food-producing animals unless it's under the direction of a veterinarian, and it can never again be used for growth promotion or feed efficiency. That's over as of January 1st. Also, there is no extra label drug use allowed with an FDA. If the antibiotic is used in feed for any animal, including bees, a veterinary feed directive is required. If it's used in water, a prescription is required. The other legality of this is that a veterinarian has to have a real relationship with the client, what we call a veterinary client-patient relationship. Just like when you take your pet to the vet, you want to know who you're dealing with. It's the same with large animals and certainly with bees. Now, there may be 40,000 hives out on somebody's property, or 25. Let me give you some definitions. A backyard beekeeper like me is up to 25 hives. What we call a sideliner beekeeper is somebody, and it's called sideliner because these people try to make money, but they have to have a real job. So these people have 25 to 300, 400 hives. The big commercial beekeepers have thousands of hives. So those are the three types of beekeepers. 85% of the beekeepers in the United States are like me. 10% are the big guys. We'll get to that. But the veterinarian must visit that operation, and then after a visit, after inspecting, you can communicate with Skype or telemedicine. You don't have to inspect every single hive, but you do have to have a legitimate relationship with that beekeeper. The veterinarian assumes responsibility for the medicine that's recommended. The veterinarian must have sufficient knowledge of the species. So this is a learning curve for us. We didn't have beekeeping in school. We're starting to have a lot of continuing education, and we're relying on entomologists to help us out because they know way more than we do. But there are a few veterinarian beekeepers. I've met a few of them, and we're working hard to catch up with apiaries people. And we must keep legitimate medical records on this. The Veterinary Feed Directive, as I said, regulates medically important, and I think it's really a good thing that we have veterinary oversight over all of these animals, and I'm really happy about the bee thing because I think bees deserve the best health care that we can give them. This is what a FDA looks like, a Veterinary Feed Directive. It's just a big prescription is all it is. But it's a specific form that you give to the feed company, and they produce the feed with the antibiotic in it. And actually some bee suppliers now are making prepackaged antibiotics. But it has the veterinary's information, the clients, about the bees, and it says right on there no extra label use. And it also has the withdrawal times, which is important because you don't want these drugs in your honey or the products, cosmetics you're putting on your face and such. Luckily, the Food Animal Residue Avoidance Data Bank has made this simple for all of us. Are you familiar with FARID? Okay. FARID does this with every species that we deal with. This is just for honeybees. So it lists all of the legal antibiotics that a veterinarian can write a VFD for or a prescription. It tells you which one it should be. And if you click on view when you go online, it describes the drug, it describes the side effects, and it tells you the withdrawal times. When I talked to the Ag Committee staffers today, I begged them to keep supporting FARID because it operates on a shoestring budget. And we need them. All the food animal people need them. This is online for anybody to look at for any species. Well, veterinarians, our job is not just writing prescriptions and filling out VFD forms. Like with any animal, we have bigger responsibilities. We need to establish a trusting relationship. We need to communicate with our clients. We need to educate ourselves and the beekeepers what we can offer. Review their record keeping. I've visited some hives. I find it hard when you're all gloved up and sticky to write there, but I've seen beekeepers that slap things on their hive record and they'll mark them with a magic marker as you go so you know the age of the queen, when you treated them with mites, what's going on. That works really well. And then I just use my phone to take a picture and I keep the records that way. You need to be able to learn, veterinarians need to be able to learn how to inspect one of those frames from the hive. How to find a queen isn't easy. How to diagnose some of these diseases. Now we have field tests, there's ELISA tests for some of these foul brood diseases, but we also send them to the Beltsville Bee Lab for diagnosis. Review their pest management protocols. What we treat the mites with, some of these insecticides, like any pest, the mites are becoming resistant to some of those pesticides. So we have to bracket the parasite with different things. Just like you put a flea collar on your dog or treat them for ticks and stuff, same with the bees. You saw that mite, that dinner plate size mite. I can't emphasize enough how much nutrition is important for bees. And I also think that a veterinarian should know the ecology of the food supply, at least within 3-mile radius of hives, because that's what they eat. And truth be told, most of what they encounter is a food desert. Question?
Yeah, Terry, when you're getting a BFD,
Yeah.
and obviously got to mix your antibiotics in with the feed,
Yeah.
food for the animal. But what is the actual food? If they're
Sugar.
so and how are you ensuring that they are consuming that?
You know,
That they need to.
you estimate the size of your hive, and then there are specific guidelines for this many bees. You put this many teaspoons in this much powdered sugar. There's actually really good directions on all of those in the FAIRD website.
And you just set it outside the hive?
No. You open the hive and you put it around on the frames themselves.
I see.
Bees love sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how about, again, need to mix it with water?
If it's water, which is perfectly legit, it's a prescription, not a VFD.
Right. But
Same thing, put sugar water.
sugar.
Yeah, you have to use pure cane sugar. You can't use,
Stevia.
yeah. It has to say pure cane, not beet sugar, not corn syrup,
No coconut.
none of that. It has to be pure cane syrup.
And
You
again,
can tell a beekeeper in the grocery store because their basket's full of bags of pure cane sugar. You go, oh, where do they keep your bees?
and you put it on the frames as well, the sugar water?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, we have water feeders.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So my feeders, they hook into the hive. I should have brought pictures of that, but there's Boardman feeders, internal feeders, all kinds of feeders that hold water. Yeah. Veterinarians are old hands at biosecurity, so we can certainly help with that. As we've seen the last couple of weeks, disaster response, we've lost, we don't know how many million bees in Florida and Texas and the wildfires out west. Honey prices are going to go up this year, that's for sure. And I would encourage veterinarians to hook up with the entomology departments and do research on bees and nutrition and the hives. Well, I'm going to step in this one. Veterinarians are also toxicologists. We know a lot about pesticides. We treat small animals, but we also treat large animals for all kinds of things. This research I'm going to talk about is from the University of Pennsylvania Pollinator Research Lab. They analyzed corbicula pollen baskets from thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of bees. They didn't find one clean pollen sample. Every pollen sample had some mixture of these pesticides. No samples had just one. The average was 3 to 6. There's arguments, what's safe, what's not safe. I'll answer questions at the end if you want to talk about neonics and such, but we're learning that bees are getting sublethal doses of pesticides, and these are accumulating in the hives. And of course, we're seeing it in the hive products. It may not kill the bee outright, but it impacts the entire colony. And it does cause neurological symptoms. And I brought a movie to show you. This is a bee from my friend's farm 2 weeks ago, 7 miles from my house, that was sprayed. Now, we have a program in the United States, too, where if a farmer is going to spray and you've communicated with him or her and told them you have bees, it's a courtesy to tell the person when you're going to spray so we can cover our hives with a wet sheet or something. This didn't happen for her. And this is what happened when her bee was sprayed. Dang. This is what people are seeing with neonics. So the data is not showing that the bee got killed outright, but their GPS gets disturbed. They're showing neurological symptoms. They go back in the hive, and well, here's another stress bomb. Big agriculture requires big beekeepers. Monocultures don't have enough pollinators, and so what the United States does, we pack up millions of bees onto these semis and we truck them all over the country. By the way, I want to put a plug in for these migrating beekeeper people, because this is a shit job. This is one of the hardest jobs there is, and now with the labor problems, this is hard to keep people who do this grueling work. And in the 40s and 50s, I think we had maybe 5,000 families that were migratory beekeepers. We only have like 1,000 left. And just to give you, you've probably read about this, but 10 years ago, a hive cost a farmer about $12 to $15 to rent, to put into his orchard. And 1 acre requires 2 of those, so 25 bucks. They're going for $200 now. There's fewer beekeepers and there are fewer bees. And so when you read about somebody robbing hives in California, this is big money we're talking about now. Fuel prices have gone up. This is not an easy job for these people. And this is what they do. In California, the almond orchard blooms for 2 weeks in February. Over half of our national bee herd is trucked to California for the almond season for 2 weeks. After that, those bees are trucked up to Washington for apples. After that, over to North Dakota for canola and alfalfa, then to my state for cherries and apples and blueberries, then up to Maine for their blueberries, back down for citrus, and around the country they go. This is a food desert. This is 1 million acres of almonds in California that bloom for 2 weeks. After the flowers are gone, there is no food. So whatever bees are left behind, whatever pollinators may be there, nothing, nothing. And then they spray between the groves for weeds and all that stuff. There's no ground cover, nothing. I was visiting a friend's farm in Ecuador in February. I'm walking down the road and I said, Mr. Vargas, when are we going to get to the farm? He said, you've been in the farm. I didn't recognize it as a farm because I expected rows of, whatever. And it was a forest of banana trees, lemon trees, lime trees, all these things. And he goes, here, and he handed me a basket. And in 20 minutes, we collected 15 different kinds of fruit and vegetables. And I said, where did you learn about polyculture? And he went, what? He goes, from my great-grandfather, like I was stupid. What's killing bees? These are the 6 things that the Honeybees Health Stakeholder Conference has summarized. Number 1, widespread use of different kinds of pesticides. Biggest killer of bees is a varroa mite, which carries all those viruses. Habitat loss to monocultures, too much corn, too much soybeans. The loss of genetic diversity by carting these bees around from California to North Dakota to here and there. Loss of our feral bees. And management practices that lend themselves to our big monoculture. Well, what can you do? You can do lots of things. You can plant a variety of your native plants at home. Annuals have no nutritional value to bees. No pollen, no honey. You want native variety of plants at home. All you can, everywhere. Encourage your towns to plant them like Ladybird used to plant all over Texas. bee hotels. You can find these on Amazon or any hardware store. They're big ones or little ones. And the feral bees will use these, especially now this time of year where they're looking for, there aren't enough hollow logs in suburban areas for our feral bees. Water. Bees need water. Let those dandelions bloom in the spring. That's the first thing that comes up, and bees will come out and eat those dandelions. Bees need 4 things. They need nectar for carbohydrates. They need pollen for protein, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. Not all pollen sources are the same. So you can plant willows and maples. They love basswood trees. Goldenrod, asters, clover, all kinds of bee. There's computer on the web. There's all kinds of bee-friendly plants for your particular area that you live in. Because we don't want this. This is an actual pollinating drone. It's only tiny. I blew it up, but people are actually experimenting with drone pollination. That's how bad it's getting.
It doesn't make honey.
Does not make honey. Doesn't make honey.
You have seen the black mirror episode?
Yeah.
Not yet.
So people who are interested in going a little further, these are some of my favorite books. This is the only veterinary textbook for any of you veterinarians. This is out of Europe. The United States doesn't have a textbook yet, but this is an excellent textbook. And these are all good. This, Thomas Seeley is up at Cornell, an entomologist. Do you know him at all? Yeah, this is a really good book. And he speaks at a lot of bee conferences. And here's some resources for you. I want to plug the Honeybee Veterinary Consortium. It's a list of veterinarians in the country that are interested, and some of them qualified to consult with beekeepers on some of these health issues that I brought up. The vet schools are doing a lot. There's continuing education now. Veterinarians are trying to play catch up with us, and we're trying to talk to the beekeepers and show them what we can offer to them. Thank you, and I'll answer any questions.